These are notes on cellular respiration, and you can find more information on pages 342 to 343 in your book. Cellular respiration is essentially getting energy from your food, and it's a function that most living organisms do, although not all living organisms. When we change seats, we usually have a group that has cellular respiration, digestion, biosynthesis, and photosynthesis. So all of those are processes that one or more living organisms do. Not necessarily all of them. I don't photosynthesize, for example. And cellular respiration is how we get our energy from our food. Hopefully by now you have internalized the idea that matter cannot turn into energy except in nuclear reactions, and that's not what we're talking about. And so we know that we get calories from the lipids, carbohydrates, and proteins that we eat. Calories we know are energy, but clearly those macromolecules, which are made of atoms, which is stuff, it's matter, can't just turn into the stuff that is energy. So the matter, while it somehow gives us energy, it doesn't become energy. Which means there's got to be some kind of chemical reaction going on, which is exothermic, which is how we get our energy. And so cellular respiration is going to examine that process on, I would say, a medium level. And then our next set of notes, which will be on ATP production, will examine it on a slightly deeper level. And then, quite frankly, you can go as deep as you want. There are people who study parts of this for a living. We're not going to do that. All right. So animals use food in two different ways. And when I'm talking about animals, I'm talking not just about the cute and fuzzy ones, but also humans as well, and worms and insects. So remember, all of those things are animals, and so they all have things in common. And one of those things they all have in common is they all eat food. Now, that might seem silly to you, but plants, for example, don't eat food. They make their own food through photosynthesis. All animals eat food. And then we all digest our food in the digestive system. So here's digestion. It happens in the digestive system. And the whole point of digestion is to break down those large macromolecules into their monomers. And the reason we need to do that is because we need to get them into the cells, regardless of where you go next. And you'll notice this splits into biosynthesis and cellular respiration, but that all happens in the cells. Well, these macromolecules are too big to fit in the cells. Think of a cellular membrane, and we'll go into more detail in cellular membranes later, but think of a cellular membrane as almost like a tennis racket. So it's got holes in it, right? And some things can pass through those holes, but some things are too big. And so if you need to get something through the holes of a tennis racket, you might need to break it down into smaller pieces to get those smaller pieces through the holes. That's what digestion is. Digestion is breaking down those large macromolecules into pieces that are small enough to get through the, we'll put this in air quotes, holes in a cellular membrane. Once they are in the cells, then we can use them for two different things. One is we can use them to grow. If we want to get bigger, we have to actually add matter to ourselves. And that is called biosynthesis. Synthesis meaning put together, bio meaning life, so it's putting together more life. Making you taller, for example. Growing your feet bigger, for example. But even things like replacing cells you lose when you get a scrape or a cut. You need to grow more you in order to fix you. And so you need materials to do that. What's interesting is, after all these things have been broken down in the digestive system so they can get into the cells then put them back together because then we want them whole again. We don't want glycerol and fatty acids. We want triglycerides, for example. We don't want a bunch of different amino acids. We want proteins, for example. So it's sort of like if you have a big Lego structure that you want to get through to the other side of your tennis racket, you have to take it apart to fit the individual Legos through, but then you build it back up once it's on the other side. The other thing we use our food for is energy, and that is a process called cellular respiration. And this happens in every cell of your body. So energy is not transported around the body like in little body battery things. If my toes need energy, I've got to get energy made in my toe cells. If my fingers need energy, I've got to be getting energy made in my finger cells. And so cellular respiration is happening in every cell in your body because every cell in your body needs energy. It's not made in one place and transported someplace else. It's not even really stored in your cells. Energy is made and it's used. And I say made, obviously we're transforming it. It's not made out of nothing because we've hopefully hammered that idea home. But meaning like there's these reactions going on that give us energy that are exothermic in every cell of our body. It's not stored for later. It's made and it's used. We'll talk about how you can store energy-ish as we go through. All right, so let's look at how oxygen and food help a cow use energy to move. First, just very basic, we know oxygen goes in, food goes in, and carbon dioxide comes out. So we've got some evidence of this. We've done mealworms. We know that the oxygen levels decreased. We know the carbon dioxide levels increased, so that helps us see oxygen going in, carbon dioxide going out. We also know this from the BTB lab because we were blowing into the test tube of BTB and it turned yellow. So we've got a lot of evidence of this oxygen carbon dioxide, or we could say gas exchange, going on in animals. We also know food goes in. We know that the mealworms ate the potato. Hopefully we all know that we eat every day. This food going in and carbon dioxide coming out hopefully is not a mystery to any of you. And you know conceptually that oxygen goes in. When we breathe in air, what our lungs are doing is filtering out the oxygen that we need. We do also have evidence of that, though, because of the mealworms. So before you knew it because somebody told you it, but you didn't really have evidence. Now we have some evidence that oxygen is going into animals. So let's go into a little more detail. There's actually a fourth molecule in this, and that's water. So we've got our water, H2O, that's up here. We've got our carbon dioxide. We know we're exhaling that, so that's right here, CO2. We've got our oxygen, that's right here, that's O2. And then we've got our glucose. So the primary monomer that we are going to use in this exothermic reaction is glucose. Our bodies, even though lipids actually contain more chemical potential energy, have more calories, our bodies, they just work best using glucose. Now, this is also, though, how you can, I'm going to put this in little air quotes that you can't see, store energy. Because we've got all these nice yellow bonds. You remember the yellow bonds are the CC and CH bonds, and we know they break apart really easily, and they form our incredibly stable molecules here, carbon dioxide and water. Hopefully this is not new to anybody, right? This is very similar to burning ethanol. There are some differences, and so I do want you to keep that in mind. It's not exactly like burning ethanol. But we do know when these molecules with CC and CH bonds react, they break apart really easily, and then they form stuff that's so stable that it's wildly exothermic. And so this is part of the mystery of how we're getting that energy. And if you were maybe in 8th grade, conceptually, we would leave it here. Since you are conceptually in 10th grade, and the next set of notes, we're going to bring it even deeper. But this is a good starting point. So we use glucose best to get our energy. Now, just a little aside, if you want to store the energy, oh yes, that's where I was going, you can actually store glucose. So we store glucose in huge glucose polymers called glycogen. And we store that in our liver, we store that in our muscles. And so that's one of the ways we store energy, because obviously we need energy at times that we're not eating. We need energy all through the night when we're not eating. We need energy when we get up and start doing stuff in the morning and are too busy to eat breakfast, which none of you should be too busy to do because breakfast is very important. But there are times, obviously, we're not eating, and yet we still need glucose. So we do have ways to, quote, store energy by storing glucose to use for later. If we've used all of our glucose and we've used all of our glycogen, then we start dipping into our lipids. So that's how we can then start to lose fat by we're done reacting all of our glucose, we're done reacting all of our glycogen, oh, we need something else, let's use lipids. Let's start using that. It is possible to start using proteins, but at that point you're essentially digesting your own muscles, and that's where people, for example, who have eating disorders like anorexia, that's what starts to happen to them. That is not a safe or healthy place to be. For the most part, we're happy if you've got a good kind of balance in your body, you're sticking with mostly the glucose stuff, then going into the glycogen, maybe a dip into lipids now and then. But that's also, going back to my kind of offhand comment of breakfast, that's also why breakfast is so important, right? All night long, you've been burning through your glucose and glycogen that you've stored up from the previous day. You get up in the morning and you still need energy now, not just to run all of your kind of bodily functions that you had at night, but to actually do stuff, right? To walk to school, to think about stuff, to process information, to get dressed. All of that takes extra energy that you didn't need at night. And all night long you've been going through your stored glucose. All right, so let's see how these things move through the cow. So we're going to take a cell in the leg of the cow, okay? And remember, this happens in every cell of your body. We're putting this in the leg to make a point of it can happen anywhere. So these tracks are color-coded based on the color of the molecules, okay? So, for example, glucose here is pink, so that follows this pink track. And notice the pink track here starts at the end of the cow's four stomachs, because that's the digestive system. Probably somewhere in the intestines, actually. So the glucose, once it's been digested, travels through the bloodstream to the muscle. Oxygen, dark blue here, is inhaled through the nose of the cow. It travels, making a brief pit stop at the lungs to get picked up by the blood, and then the blood carries it as well to the muscle. Okay? Once in the muscle, our products, again, not surprisingly, are carbon dioxide and water. Carbon dioxide comes from the muscle, again, carried through the bloodstream, pit stop at the lungs, where it is rapidly exhaled through the nose, and then water travels, I don't know why it travels in a loop here, maybe that's where the cow's bladder is, that's got to be where the bladder is, and then is urinated out. And so that's where the water comes out. All right, so let's see this in action if you want to see cute little molecules that I did not make, but you can see what's going on. Some of you might find this obnoxious. If you do, feel free to keep going. Otherwise, you're welcome to pause and rewind and look at molecules all you want. All right, so now let's look at what actually happens inside the muscle cell. So this is a reaction that's happening, and as you can see, the glucose and the oxygen are going in, and the water and the carbon dioxide are coming out. And as I said, if you were simply conceptually in 8th grade, we would probably leave it here and call this cellular respiration. We're going to go deeper, although not in this video, to look at what happens during this chemical change, because in fact the glucose does not ever react directly with the oxygen. So remember I said it's like the combustion reactions, but it's also a little different. This is not glucose reacting with oxygen. This is glucose and oxygen going into a process that is Oh, depending on how you break it up, anywhere from 3 to over 20 steps long. And we're going to not leave it at this level, but we're also not going to go to 20 steps either. But I do want you to kind of keep that in the back of your head, that the glucose and the oxygen don't react with one another the way ethanol, for example, reacts with oxygen. Although the products and reactants overall are the same, right? We have a hydrocarbon reacting with oxygen, and you get water and carbon dioxide out. So there are similarities there. So the chemical equation for cellular respiration is the glucose, C6H12O6, plus the oxygen gas, yielding carbon dioxide and water. But you'll see it sometimes the way I've made it here with lots of little arrows. And that's indicative of there are lots of steps that get us to that. It's not simply the oxygen reacting with the glucose. And then the overall reaction with lots of steps in between is exothermic. So overall, in the end, you've gotten a lot of energy where you once had chemical potential because you have exothermic-y stuff going on. In all of these steps, there's some steps that are endothermic, there's some steps that are exothermic, but overall you get exothermic. All right, I think that's it. Oh, nope, that's not it. Sorry. So just here is looking overall what's happening. And again, remember that this shows it as if these are reacting together. That's the basic. And then because it's exothermic though, and that doesn't change, it's always exothermic, you end up with all of this energy that can be used for both motion and heat. And we know, of course, 90% of energy is lost between trophic levels because of the body using that energy to carry out cellular processes, to move, to do whatever. All right. So I also want to break down, because I've heard people say like, well, it can't be this because that's the digestive system, or it can't be that because that's the circulatory system. So now that you know all those systems, you've learned them in prior years, now you can really start to understand how they actually do all work together. They are separate systems, but they work together in an organism. So first, oxygen comes in and carbon dioxide comes out of the nose and mouth. Okay? And I wouldn't say first. I mean, all of this stuff is always happening. But we'll start here. Then in the lungs, oxygen and CO2 are exchanged in the blood. So it's the blood that carries the oxygen and CO2 to different, or carries the oxygen to different parts of the body and carries the CO2 from different parts of the body. So all of the oxygen, CO2, think of it as like a train station. So it quickly gets from the nose and mouth to the lungs. Once in the lungs, it quickly gets back out through the nose and mouth. But then in the lungs, it's where it gets into the bloodstream. Heart then pumps the blood throughout the body. So while that's what we would call the respiratory system, without the circulatory system, you don't have that blood moving throughout the body. So you need the heart to pump the blood, which carries the oxygen and CO2. Then in the intestines, the molecules are transported to the cells in the body through the blood. So again, you need that heart pumping to circulate the blood, to circulate all of these monomers that have been digested in the digestive system. And then in all cells, right, in every cell in the body, glucose is then broken down to release the chemical potential energy. I must have written release energy in the bonds earlier. I mean, that is what we say, but again, remember that in breaking those bonds, it actually requires energy, but then through the reaction, forming the products, it forms such stable products that the reaction itself releases energy. So that's why we say chemical potential to thermal and kinetic. All right, now we're done. So if you have any questions, please put them online or ask them in class. Have a good day.